Okay, so we are moving on, Chapter 3, to talking about Social Security taxes. And if you recall in the first chapter, we did all the acronyms, and we know that Social Security taxes are a part of what program? FICA, right? Which stands for Federal Insurance Contributions Act, exactly. And we also know one other interesting thing about Social Security taxes, which is what? There's two pieces to it, right? But what's interesting about it is both employee and employer pay it. And that's different from any other tax, isn't it? Okay. Which basically we've seen this. This is all review. Federal Insurance Contributions Act, 1935, passed by Roosevelt. It's paid by both employees and employers. Some of the numbers you're going to need to start kind of getting used to. So what does 6.2 and 1.45 add up to? Thank you. So depending upon how your payroll software is where you work, you might see individual numbers like 6.2 and 1.45, or you might see it all lumped together as one. Okay. And then your employer matches. So the total percentage going into FICA for each dollar you earn up to your cap is what? 15.3%, right? Now, those numbers, not in addition to 6.2 and 1.45, you should be, when I say 7.65, you should know what I'm talking about pretty easily there too. Okay, now let's break it down and say, what percentage is going into OASDI in total? 12.4 plus what? 2.9. So you really need to know all those numbers because we're going to be manipulating all of them in this chapter. So if I say 12.4%, that means both shares of OASDI. If I say 7.65, that's both shares for one party. 15.3 is the whole shamoo. 1.45 is just one person's Medicare, etc., etc. So you should feel pretty good about manipulating these numbers in your head as we move forward. And then we've got this, actually that's only if you're single. If you're married filing joint, the 0.9 doesn't kick in until what? 250. Good. And the employer does not match that, do they? That's only an employee tax. Okay, then it took them 16 years to figure out that self-employed people weren't paying it because they didn't have an employer. So an act called SECA was passed, Self-Employed Contribution Act. And this is where you're both employee and employer. So like on my business, my consulting and tax, and I'm an author and all that good stuff, right? I'm self-employed. So what do I pay? What do I pay on my authoring income, for example? I pay 12.4 plus 2.9 equals 15.3. This is what kills a lot of people before you even get to income tax. I haven't paid a penny of income tax and I've already got 15%. So say you get a $5,000 royalty check, right? You've got $750 goes to Social Security taxes before you ever touch income tax.
Wouldn't you just only pay the 7.65 because you're just an employee?
I'm both. It's my own business. I'm both. And that's why I'm saying this is, I can't tell you how many times a year somebody comes to me, they're a drywaller, they're a painter, they're a physical therapist, they're a videographer, they make 30 grand a year, they got a bunch of write-offs, their income taxes are negligible, they barely owe any income taxes. I'm like, dude, you owe $4,500, 30,000 times 15%, you owe $4,500 in Social Security taxes.
So if it was a business within a business, say like a lumber broking company has their employees make their own companies, would you still pay 15.3?
The lumber broking company would only pay this because they're only the employer.
Okay, but if
The guys on the bottom that are self-employed, they're gonna pay both.
well, they're employed by that company, which one company?
Okay, I didn't understand the example. So
So say like two guys own a company, a lumber broking company.
so that's business A,
Yeah.
and they,
business B is under their company.
okay, does business B subcontract with them?
Well, business A backs business B with all of the pricing and everything.
Backs or owns?
Both, effectively both. I guess.
Okay, so if you own 100% of a subsidiary for tax law purposes, there's no differentiation.
Okay.
So then it would be employer-employee. So these are all the numbers we just did. 12.4, 2.9, Self-Employed Contribution Act. This should be fairly impactful if you've ever been self-employed. If you get a 1099, you think you did like some summer gig you went and watched, you know, you broke somebody's horse. And they W-2 or they 1099 you for $2,000. Off the top of your head, what do you owe? $300. 2,000 times 15%. It's 15.3 technically, but I mean just to estimate, right? So did you make $2,000 at all? No. Versus if they said I'll cut you a W-2 for $2,000, what percentage are you gonna, or what amount are you gonna pay? Yeah, about half of that, 150. You see the difference already in taking a gig as an independent versus an employee? So basically the issues are you an employer and independent? Is what you're doing considered employment? And is it considered taxable wages? And those are the three questions we're going to address in this chapter. Okay, this we just went through. You're an employee if you perform a service for an employer, regardless of the citizenship or residence of other. And basically, these are the key words, which goes back to behavioral control, financial control, and perceived relationship. Now, when you see stuff like this, where I'll tell you, do you know what this word means? Anyone know what that means? If I say statutorily, it's according to law, statute, right? Statutorily, these occupations are covered by FICA. In other words, if you do this, you can't go to work for somebody who says you're self-employed, even if you really kind of are. They have to pay their 7.65 on it. If I'm a full-time life insurance salesperson, if I drive like the Schwann's truck or a dry cleaning truck, if I'm a full-time traveling salesperson, or if I work at home and do things like stuff envelopes or package things or do data entry at home, you can't call me self-employed. I have to be covered by FICA. That is federal law, statutory law. Any questions on those? So there's no question there. If y'all work for me and I misclassify you, in other words, I call you all independents, like y'all write code for me, right? I've got a contract with the Department of Defense, and you're all my coders. And I treat you all as independents, but you work 50 hours a week for me. You don't have other clients. You have to get, I mean, I give you the project flow chart, and you've got to have X amount of code in and debugged by a certain schedule. You're not really independent contractors, are you? You're my employees. If I misclassify you, I'm going to be penalized for everything that I didn't do when you should have been classified as an employee. In other words, if I'm calling you independent, what percentage are you paying of your coding wages? If I call you independent and I pay you $50,000 a year, what percentage of that are you paying? 15.3. What percentage should you have been paying? 7.65, and I should have been paying 7.65, right? So if one of you brings a wage claim against me, or there's some sort of audit, that reveals that I've misclassified you, I am going to be or I could be penalized, could be penalized for that other 7.65 I should have been paying, plus all of the income taxes I should have been withholding from your checks. There's 15 of you sitting in here at 50 grand a year. Do that math real quick. That's $750,000 times roughly 7.5%, 49 grand, plus all your income taxes. That's the kind of stuff that puts people out of business, for real. And I mean, I've seen that. So you have to make crystal clear, sure that you're categorizing your people correctly. Okay, and so again here I'm saying you may be penalized for this. There's a lot of mitigating situations. I'm not going to go into too much, but again, if we've been acting like you're independents, even if you're really not, and I issue you 1099s and you've been putting that on your tax return and paying full taxes on it, the agent may mitigate some of my penalties. He or she doesn't have to. IRS agent doesn't have to, but may. Okay, specific situations. Yeah, not any longer, but government employees may be exempt from OASDI and HI. They've got their own retirement system. Yeah, I know. If they vote for us, or they vote on our behalves, and they have no skin in the game. They got no skin in the game. An impatriate is somebody that's living in America but's a citizen in another country. Right now, 80% of all PhD candidates in this country, and I can't remember what the number was. It was like 60 or 70% of the highest level chief engineering officer jobs in this country are held by Central and Southeast Asians. So we've got this visa called an HB11 that allows them come to work here, right? So they're impatriots. They work in America, but they're not going to retire here. They're exempt from FICA.
So what about dual citizens?
That's a good question. Dual citizens have to pay into FICA.
Okay.
Dual citizens have to pay into FICA. Now, what about when you go work somewhere else?
Same thing. They tax you.
Subject to it. When I worked in Australia for 6 months. I worked in Denmark for 2 years. You're taxed, and as an American citizen, you're taxed no matter where you work in the world.
Are we the only country that does that?
Huh?
Are we the only country that does that?
Oh, no, I think that's pretty much a Western thing. I mean, Europeans. If you're like from England, you go work in Australia, you pay British taxes.
They tax you till you die, and they still try to get you.
Yeah, but only if you're worth 1.3 million. You got to have a pretty good sized estate. But also, just so you know, if you do go work in another country, the first, and I'm not going to get this number exactly right because it changes every year, but around about the first 95,000, you don't pay income tax on. So, yeah, I mean that's
First 95.
the first 95,000. Yeah, you know how that goes. Okay. And then family employees, this is kind of a tax planning tool. If I had kids under 21 that worked in my business, and I had a partnership or an LLC, I wouldn't have to pay FICA on them. So that's a way to kind of pass money from one generation to the other without getting hit with multiple layers of taxation. But you can't hire your 15-year-old and pay him 200 grand a year to sweep up, right? It's got to make sense. Household employees, this is back to your staff, right? Your chauffeur and your dog walker and your nanny and all that good stuff. You have to pay FICA on them. And you have to W-2 them if they make $2,000 or more a year. And additional exemptions, in other words, people you don't have to pay FICA on. You don't have to pay FICA on penal inmates, medical interns, student nurses, and workers serving temporarily in case of an emergency. Okay, do you withhold any taxes on an independent contractor? Yay or nay? No. You pay all your own taxes if you're an independent contractor, right? So when you walk in the door, what do I have you fill out again? A W-9, not a W-4, a W-9. And all a W-9 asks you for is your name, address, and social security number. I don't care if you're married or how many allowances you have or, you know, any of that, because I don't do any of your taxes. And then at the end of the year, what do I send you? A 1099 miscellaneous. But only if you earn how much? $600. You have to get to 600. Okay. This is the key right here. If you're an independent contractor, and I pay you $15 an hour to write code for me, or 50 grand a year, let's say, are you going to pay 15.3% on that whole 50,000? What does this mean? Anybody, you guys should know what this means from going through accounting. Is your gross the same as your net?
That's
What kinds
after
of-
expenses.
Yeah, what kinds of things might you write off if you code for me?
Everything.
Actually, it's a tough one. There's not a lot of write-offs, but what would you write off?
Your equipment, continuing education.
Your computer equipment, any hardware, your internet fees, you know, your broadband fees, maybe part of your smartphone. You know, you generally don't have mileage if you work. You might write off your office and home, continuing ed. Sure. So you're not going to pay on 50 grand. You're going to, you know, find 8 grand worth of expenses and pay on your net earnings. Okay. For Thursday, if you could read chapter 3, that would give you a heads up on what we're going to talk about, and we'll do some calculations, okay? All right. Good work today.